Again, wishing you a Happy New Year. The Jewish New Year is already several months ago. That's true. But as the verse says, and the Rebbe himself said Happy New Year. As the verse says, Hashem in Tehillim, in Psalms from King David, Hashem Yisbar B'chsei V'amim, that Hashem reckons and counts, has accounting according to the calendar of the nations. So there's something here for us to celebrate. So what should we celebrate? Well, let's celebrate Tanya. All right. Okay, we begin chapter 8. Chapter 8 is the final chapter to give us an understanding about the animal soul, that the full makeup of it, right? Animal soul is not just an inclination. It's a complete being that has intelligence and has emotions, as we will understand more detailed about what that means. I mean, we've already understood. So we've explained that the way God creates the world and the animal soul itself, it is sort of the middle ground of klipa, of the shell that covers over God's presence and his realness in our lives and in the world. And from that klipas noiga that has a mixture of good and bad in it, we can either bring out the good or debase and bring out the bad. Now, what happens if you did something that's bad with good intentions? Now, when we say something bad, it just means something that is against the will of God, right? So, for a Jew to eat forbidden foods is bad. It's bad. Forbidden in Hebrew is the word asur. It means it's bound, meaning it's bound to negative forces and it cannot be elevated. So, for example, if an individual ate something that's forbidden to be eaten, right? Like those creepy crawlers, or like, those creatures in the bottom of the sea, right? That are not kosher. I'm giving that by way of example. And you ate that unbeknownst to you that it was not kosher. Unwittingly, you did it. Your intention was, though, to eat for the sake of heaven in order to serve God. So in other words, you had the right intent, but you had the wrong product. Does that matter? Because, in a world that says all you need is love, meaning all you need is the intention, so what's the difference? What you ate, right? So the Alter Rebbe says, well, no. Even though you ate something, again, unwittingly, you thought it was okay. You thought it was a permissible thing to eat. And you actually ate it with the intent that I'm now going to eat this and I'll learn some Tanya, or do some other good deed, another mitzvah. And you actually did, with the strength of that food, that it gave you the energy that you could do that good, that mitzvah. You prayed, you studied, whatever, right? Yet, the vitality of that food that's forbidden, that is forbidden meaning it's bound to negative extraneous forces, it doesn't descend with those words of your Torah. as it would be in the case of permitted food. Why? Because that food is held captive in Sitra Acher, in the three unclean klippas that have no good in them. Therefore, the energy of that food is not elevated to sanctity. Even if it was just a rabbinic prohibition, right? So how do we understand that? So a very simple metaphor for that would be you unwittingly, someone, not you, God forbid, not you, none of us, right? Someone unwittingly ate food that was poisonous, or salmonella, right? And you didn't know. The fact that you didn't know, does that take away from the fact that you're going to get sick from it? That it could have a real negative effect on you? Unwittingly doesn't take away from the reality that this food is poisonous and could, have an ill effect on you, even though your intentions were only for good. In other words, intention isn't sufficient. Intention has to be with the actual, material good that it too is good and fitting to be used. So that would be the metaphor. So therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, there's an evil impulse that lusts for forbidden things, and he calls this an un-Jewish demon. And then you have a Jewish demon that lusts for permissible things. So, for example, like food that's permissible to eat, that it's kosher, and you have a craving. That's called the Jewish demon. But to eat lobster, to eat non-kosher meat, to eat ham, for a Jew, that's called a non-Jewish demon inside of you. We all have demons in us. So the Jewish demon is, likes to eat food, kosher food. That's a Jewish demon, right? Now, what happens even if you eat the permitted foods? So unpermitted foods, right? It's going to have an effect on the individual. What happens with the permitted food that we're eating out of a bodily desire? They can revert to holiness. How can they revert to holiness? Because you can have a proper intent, right? You can change that. You can do tshuva, right? But yet, even when a person afterwards, from this Jewish demon inside of them, meaning that their desire and have lust for that which is permissible, right? And afterwards you kind of revert and use it. Like you ate that food, but your intent was just for the pleasure. Just merely for merely for the pleasure. That's my point over here. The point the Alter Rebbe is making. As opposed to eating this food for a higher purpose. That you can do good, change the world for good, right? So, the fact that permissible food now was not used for that intent, but now you've reverted it. Now you're using it for that intent. That I can now learn Tanya better. I could be focused in, I need the strength because I was going to help somebody move today, right? A mitzvah of kindness. So I needed the strength. So when I ate it for the pleasure. Then afterwards I'm using it. Oh, I'm going to use that strength from that food so I could help my friend to move today. So now it can be elevated because it's permissible food. But at the time, there was a self-directed devotion, and it became my blood and flesh. So there's a trace of negativity that's left there, because even though the product itself is kosher, but the intent at the time was not. Therefore, as we learned previously, the Alter Rebbe says the body will have to go through what we call chibud hakever, purgatory of the grave, and as we explain, that's a kindness of God to cleanse the stain on our soul and body from the Jewish demon that's inside of us. Unless you never had pleasure from something in this world. And the Alter Rebbe gives an example. Someone who did not have pleasure was actually an extremely wealthy individual in his time. He was the author of the Mishnah, Rabbi Judah the Prince. At his demise, he picked up his pinky or finger, his small finger, saying, from everything that I had in this world, and he was an extremely wealthy person, I did not take pleasure in it. He only used it in the service of God. He had it all, right? So, which, by the way, what does that mean? That me and the rest of us, we will have to go through a cleansing process. It's only going to be the righteous that won't. It's okay, we'll keep each other company. Sorry for that. Meaning, we're not pure, we're not perfectly pure. Because we do seek pleasure from things in this world. But God is so kind that He's going to clean us up so we could have then pleasure of the divine, which is actually quite amazing to have that capability, that opportunity, that we can ultimately have a pleasure from the divine. And the only way you can appreciate and have pleasure from the divine is when you're cleansed from other kinds of pleasure. You know, we all know people, and I'm giving this by way of metaphor, who are very materialistic and not really spiritual. And it's very hard to have any kind of more deeper spiritual conversation with them, because they're so bound to the materiality of this world that they're just not in the same wavelength. And it's hard to have a conversation or a discussion or to bring with such an individual. It's not so easy. Because what that person needs to go through is a process of divesting of their materiality so that they can be open to spirituality. You can't have both. You can't be engrossed in materiality and engrossed in spirituality. They're two opposites. You're going to live in one world or the other. So if you want to live in a more spiritual, refined, godly world, so then the material world, that doesn't mean that you're not involved in materiality. Again, as we've learned many times, the Jewish way is to be involved in materiality, but not for its own pleasure-seeking purpose, but for a higher purpose. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Judah the Prince, who was the author of the Mishnah, the first recorded piece of the oral Torah, was extremely wealthy. He was the wealthiest person in his day. And yet, he said he didn't have pleasure from it. He didn't seek pleasure from it. Right? He used it for a higher purpose. So he had a beautiful home. And we shall have beautiful homes. shall have all wonderful things, but not because those things are what gives us pleasure. Well, those things give us pleasure when we use them for a higher purpose. So I have a beautiful home, so I can invite guests, a lot of guests for Shabbos. I have, lots of rooms in the home, so I could have the mitzvah of achnasas orchim, of having guests stay over in the home, not only eat at my table, but stay over in my home, and give them the pleasure of a beautiful place. Have all these beautiful artifacts, because then it enhances the experience for me and for others in a holiday celebration. So it's for an enhancement of the spirit. So when we do that, that's living a different life. That's now taking what we've got, elevating it, and using it for a greater purpose.